Jesus of Nazareth lived in the early 1st century Common Era, but no contemporary portrait of him survives. Unlike Roman emperors, who had statues and busts made to glorify their power, Jesus was a teacher in a small Jewish community within the Roman Empire. Early Christians avoided making images of Jesus, partly because of the Jewish prohibition against idolatry. The Ten Commandments explicitly forbid the making of graven images, and since the first Christians came from Jewish backgrounds, they carried this sensitivity. Another reason is that Jesus was not widely known outside of his movement during his lifetime. Unlike Augustus or Nero, he wasn't a figure that Roman artists would sculpt or paint. The New Testament itself contains no description of Jesus' physical appearance. This suggests that early believers were less concerned with outward appearance and more with the meaning of his teachings, life, and resurrection. For the first 150 years, Jesus was remembered through oral tradition, preaching, and texts, not through portraits. His image was preserved in words, not in art. By the late 2nd century, when Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, Christians began cautiously introducing symbolic art into their burial places. The catacombs of Rome, underground cemeteries used by Christians, contain the oldest symbolic depictions of Christ. One of the most common symbols was the Good Shepherd, a youthful figure carrying a sheep on his shoulders. This was a reference to Jesus' words in the Gospel of John, "I am the Good Shepherd." In these images, Jesus is portrayed not as a divine king, but as a humble, youthful shepherd. The symbolism emphasizes care, protection, and salvation. Another symbolic portrayal was Jesus as a teacher or philosopher. These images show him with short hair, wearing a Roman toga, seated among disciples. This style reflects Greco-Roman artistic traditions. Philosophers were often depicted in this way, so Christians borrowed the visual language to communicate that Jesus was the ultimate teacher. These early images were not portraits, but symbols. They allowed believers to meditate on Christ without claiming to represent his true physical appearance. Other symbols included the fish, Greek ichthys, an acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. The fish appeared carved on tombs, scratched on walls, and painted on catacomb frescoes. The use of symbols was safer during times of persecution. A shepherd with a sheep might look like ordinary pastoral art to outsiders, but to Christians it carried profound meaning. Around 235 CE, in the Syrian city of Dura Europos, the earliest surviving narrative painting of Jesus was created. This comes from a Christian house church, one of the oldest known. Its baptistery was decorated with wall paintings of biblical scenes. Among these frescoes is the earliest image of Jesus, the healing of the paralytic. In this painting, Jesus is shown as a young, beardless man, dressed in a simple Roman tunic. He gestures with his hand to perform the healing. The paralytic appears twice in the scene. First, he is shown lying on his bed, paralyzed. Then, in a second moment, he is shown carrying his bed, healed. This two-in-one depiction was a common ancient technique for showing narrative action in a single frame. Jesus here looks like any Roman youth, short-haired, plain clothes, showing that early Christians had not yet settled on a fixed icon of Christ. The placement of this image in the baptistery reinforced the message of healing, renewal, and transformation, appropriate for the sacrament of baptism. Other frescoes from Dura Europos also show Jesus walking on water and as the Good Shepherd. These confirm that by the early 3rd century, Christian communities had started to use narrative imagery of Christ. After its excavation in the early 1930s, the frescoes, including the healing of the paralytic, were carefully removed from the ruins. These ancient wall paintings are now preserved at the Yale University Art Gallery in the United States. The original church remains in ruins at the archaeological site in Dura Europos, Syria, near the modern village of Salihye. A major shift occurred after Christianity was legalized by Emperor Constantine in 313 CE. Christians could now build public churches and commission sacred art. From this time forward, Jesus began to be shown in a more majestic and standardized way. The most common new style was the bearded, long-haired Christ, wearing a robe, often with a halo of light behind his head. This bearded image may have been inspired by Greco-Roman depictions of philosophers, but it also emphasized Christ's wisdom, age, and eternal nature. In mosaics, frescoes, and icons, Jesus was often enthroned as a king or ruler, holding a book of the Gospels and blessing with his right hand. This form became known as Christ Pantocrator, Christ the Almighty, which spread across the Byzantine world and shaped Orthodox Christian iconography. By the 5th century, this style had become dominant, and it remains the most widely recognized image of Jesus today. Unlike earlier symbolic images, this iconic Jesus was no longer just a teacher or shepherd. He was the divine Lord of the universe, eternal and all-powerful. With imperial support, artists across the empire reproduced this type of Christ. As churches filled with mosaics and icons, the image of Jesus became standardized. Thus, from the symbolic shepherd to the majestic Pantocrator, the journey of Jesus' image reflects both theological development and cultural adaptation, moving from hidden symbols to a universal visual identity. As we've seen, the image of Jesus has a fascinating history. From a time when no portraits were made at all, to symbolic images hidden in the catacombs, to the very first painted scenes in places like Dura Europos, and finally to the majestic icons that shaped the Jesus we recognize today. His visual story reflects the growth of Christianity itself. These images are more than art. They're windows into how generations of believers understood who Jesus was. From humble shepherd to eternal king, each stage carries deep meaning. If you enjoyed this journey through history and art, don't forget to like the video, share it with others who might be interested, and subscribe for more stories that bring the past to life. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.